the chief who cast two shadows. Before we start, just a reminder, if you enjoy this kind of content, subscribe to the channel. Now let's get to the video. A tale from the Congo Basin, 1970. In the heart of the Congo Basin, where the world seemed untouched by the march of civilization, the Mbuti people prepared for their most sacred ritual, the Great Hunt. Chief Okello stood at the edge of the village clearing, his withered hands gripping the ivory-tipped spear that had belonged to his father and his father's father before him. At 53 seasons, he was considered old by Mbuti standards, yet his eyes still held the fierce intelligence that had guided his people through countless hunts and the wisdom that came from understanding the forest's deepest secrets. But today, something was different. As the chief moved beneath the dappled sunlight, the other villagers noticed with growing unease that his shadow fell not once, but twice upon the earth, one shadow pointing east toward the rising sun, another stretching west toward the darkness that still lingered in the forest depths. Tata Okello, whispered Yengo, the village Alacelde's hunter, using the respectful term for father. Your shadow, it speaks of things beyond our understanding. The chief glanced down at the dual silhouettes that followed his every movement. He had first noticed this peculiarity 3 moons ago, during the night of the blood moon, when the spirits were said to walk freely between the world of the living and the realm of the ancestors. At first, he had dismissed it as a trick of the light, but as days passed, the second shadow had grown more distinct, more purposeful in its movements. The forest holds many mysteries, my friend, Okello replied, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken knowledge. Perhaps this is merely another. Around them the village bustled with preparation. Women painted intricate patterns on their faces with white clay and red ochre, symbols that would protect the hunters and ensure the success of the great hunt. Children helped gather the sacred herbage that would be burned to honor the forest spirits, while the hunters checked their nets, spears, and arrows with a meticulous care that meant the difference between life and death in the unforgiving wilderness. The great hunt was not merely about sustaining the tribe with meat, it was a spiritual communion with the forest itself, a ritual that had been performed for countless generations. The Mbuti believed that during this time, the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds grew thin, allowing them to communicate with the ancestors and the forest spirits that governed their lives. Amara Okello's daughter and the village's most gifted tracker approached her father with concern etched across her delicate features. At 25, she possessed an almost supernatural ability to read the signs of the forest, the bent grass that revealed an animal's passage, the scratches on bark that told of territorial markings, the subtle changes in bird calls that warned of predators. Father, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, the forest spirits are restless. I can feel their unease in the wind, see it in the way the leaves tremble without cause. And your shadow, she paused, her eyes fixed on the dual silhouettes. It frightens the children. Okello placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. Fear often comes from not understanding, my child. Perhaps this shadow is not a curse, but a gift, a sign that our ancestors have chosen me to bridge 2 worlds during this hunt. As if summoned by their conversation, Mama Kesi, the village's ancient wise woman and keeper of the old stories, emerges from her hut. Her back was bent with age, her hair white as the morning mist, but her eyes burned with an inner fire that seemed to see beyond the veil of the physical world. The bony ornaments around her neck clicked softly as she walked, each one inscribed with symbols that predated memory. The shadow speaks truth, she said, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. We have seen this sign in the smoke of the sacred fire, in the patterns of the stars, in the dreams that come when the moon is dark. Chief Okello carries within him the spirit of 2 worlds, the world of the living and the world of those who have passed beyond the great river. The gathered villagers fell silent, their preparations momentarily forgotten, as they absorbed the weight of the wise woman's words. In Mbuti culture, such pronouncements were not made lightly, for Mama Kessie was known to commune with spirits and interpret omens with an accuracy that bordered on the supernatural. "What does this mean for the great hunt?" asked Bomani, a young hunter whose courage often exceeded his wisdom. "Will the spirits favor us, or will they turn their faces away?" Mama Kessie's ancient eyes fixed upon the chief's dual shadows, studying them as one might read the pages of a sacred text. "The hunt will reveal all," she said finally. "But you know this Chief Okello will face a choice that will determine not only the fate of this hunt, but the future of our people. The shadow that points east speaks of new beginnings, of paths not yet taken. The shadow that points west whispers of ancient obligations, of debts that must be paid to the ancestors." As the morning progressed and the final preparations were completed, the hunters gathered in a circle around the sacred fire that burned perpetually at the heart of the village. The flames danced hypnotically, casting their own shadows that seemed to merge and separate in an endless dance of light and darkness. Chief Okello raised his spear toward the canopy above, where the first rays of full sunlight were beginning to penetrate the forest green ceiling. "Great spirits of the forest," he called out in the ancient tongue that was reserved for the most sacred ceremonies, "we come before you as your children, seeking your blessing for the hunt that will sustain our people through the coming season. Guide our spears, strengthen our nets, and grant us the wisdom to take only what we need and give thanks for all that we receive." The other hunters echoed his words, their voices rising in harmony with the natural sounds of the forest, the calls of exotic birds, the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, the distant trumpeting of elephants moving through the deeper reaches of the wilderness. As the ceremony concluded and the hunters began to move toward the forest's edge, Amara noticed something that made her blood run cold. While her father's physical form moved with the group, his eastern shadow remained motionless by the sacred fire, as if anchored to that spot by invisible chains. Only the western shadow followed the chief's movements, stretching long and dark across the forest floor. She opened her mouth to call out a warning, but Mama Kessie's weathered hand touched her arm, silencing her with a gentle but firm pressure. "Let it be, child," the wise woman whispered. "The spirits have their own purposes, and we must trust in their wisdom, even when we cannot understand their ways." And so the great hunt began, with Chief Okello leading his people into the depths of the Ituri forest, carrying with him the mystery of two shadows and the weight of a destiny that none could yet comprehend. Behind them, the eastern shadow remained by the sacred fire, a silent sentinel watching over the village, while ahead lay the unknown challenges that would test not only their skills as hunters, but their very understanding of the world they thought they knew. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the hunting party disappeared into its green embrace, and in the distance, the sound of drums began to echo through the trees, drums that no living Mbuti had struck, carrying rhythms that spoke of ancient secrets and the thin boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the spirits. The hunting party moved through the forest with the fluid grace of those born to its rhythms, their bare feet finding silent perches on the carpet of fallen leaves and moss-covered logs. Chief Okello led the way, his remaining shadow, the western one, stretching behind him like a dark banner as they ventured deeper into the Ituri's heart. The forest around them pulsed with life. Colobus monkeys chattered in the canopy above, their black and white forms swinging through the branches with acrobatic ease. The air was thick with humidity and the rich scent of decomposing vegetation, punctuated by the sweet fragrance of hidden flowers and the musky odor of the animals they sought. Congo, the eldest hunter, moved beside the chief with the easy confidence of one who had participated in dozens of great hunts. His weathered face bore the ritual scars that marked him as a master tracker, and his eyes constantly scanned the forest floor for signs of their quarry. "The elephant herd passed this way 2 days ago," he murmured, pointing to a depression in the earth where a massive foot had left its mark. "But they have moved deeper into the forest, toward the sacred groves where the ancestors sleep. Okello nodded, but his attention was divided. Even as he processed information about their prey, Parparfi's consciousness remained focused on the strange sensation of incompleteness that had plagued him since leaving the village. It was as if half of his soul had remained behind, tethered to that eastern shadow by the sacred fire. Young Bomani, eager to prove himself worthy of the hunt, had ranged ahead of the main group. His enthusiasm was both an asset and a liability. His keen eyes often spotted signs that others missed, but his impulsiveness sometimes led him into dangerous situations. Tata Okello echoed softly from a grove of massive mahogany trees. "Come quickly, you must see this." The hunting party converged on Bomani's position, where the young hunter stood transfixed before a sight that defied explanation. Carved into the trunk of the largest tree were symbols that none of them recognized, intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles, as if they were alive and responding to the observer's presence. But more disturbing than the unknown symbols was what lay at the base of the tree. The bones of animals arranged in a perfect circle, bleached white by time and weather. In the center of this macabre mandala sat a human skull, its empty socket seeming to stare directly at Chief Okello. "This is not the work of our people," whispered Amara, her tracker's instincts telling her that they had stumbled upon something ancient and potentially dangerous. "These symbols, they speak of magic older than our oldest stories." Mama Casey had insisted on accompanying the hunt, despite her advanced age, claiming that the spirits had shown her visions of events that would require her presence. Now she approached the tree with a mixture of reverence and fear, her bone ornaments clicking softly as she moved. "The forgotten ones," she breathed, her voice barely audible above the forest's ambient sounds. "I have heard whispers of them in the deepest dreams, seen their shadows in the smoke of the sacred fire. They were the first people of this forest, the ones who came before even our most ancient ancestors." "What happened to them?" asked Bomani, his earlier enthusiasm replaced by a growing sense of unease. The wise woman's eyes never left the carved symbols as she spoke. "They delved deeply into the mysteries of the spirit world, sought to command powers that were meant only for the ancestors themselves. The forest spirits grew angry and removed them from the world of the living. But their magic lingers still, waiting for one who can bridge the gap between worlds." As if responding to her words, the symbols on the tree began to glow with a faint, phosphorescent light. The hunters stepped back instinctively, their hands moving to their weapons, but Chief Okello found himself drawn forward, compelled by a force he could not resist. "Father, no!" Amara called out, but her voice seemed to come from a great distance, muffled by the sudden thickness of the air around the ancient tree. Okello's hand reached out to touch the glowing symbols, and the moment his fingers made contact with the carved bark, the world exploded into vision. He saw the forest as it had been centuries ago, populated by a people whose mastery of spiritual forces had allowed them to communicate directly with the ancestors, to bend the very fabric of reality to their will. He witnessed their hubris, their attempt to use their power to achieve immortality, to become spirits themselves, while still retaining their physical forms. He felt the anger of the forest spirits, the cosmic balance that had been disturbed by mortal ambition. And they saw their punishment, not death, but something far worse, banishment to a realm between worlds, forever caught between life and death, between the physical and the spiritual. But most terrifying of all, he saw that their punishment was not yet complete. They had been waiting, trapped in their liminal existence, for one who possessed the rare ability to exist in both worlds simultaneously, one who cast two shadows. The vision ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving Okello gasping and disoriented. The symbols on the tree had returned to their normal appearance, but the chief knew that something fundamental had changed. He could feel it in the very marrow of his bones. A connection had been established, a bridge had been built between his world and theirs. "We must continue the hunt," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his mind. But we must be more cautious than ever. We are no longer alone in this forest. As the hunting party resumed their journey, none of them noticed that the skull in the bone circle had turned to follow the departure, its empty sockets tracking their movement until they disappeared into the green shadows of the deeper forest. The hunt continued throughout the day, but the usual signs of abundant game were strangely absent. The forest seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something momentous to occur. Even the ever-present chorus of insects and birds had grown muted, as if the very wildlife sensed the tension that hung in the humid air. It was Amara who first noticed the tracks, not of the animals they sought, but of bare human feet that appeared alongside their own trail. The footprints were perfectly formed, but somehow wrong, as if they had been made by feet that no longer quite belonged to the physical world. "Father," she whispered, pointing to the mysterious tracks, "we are being followed." Okello examined the prints with growing unease. They were the right size and shape to have been made by members of his own hunting party, but he could account for every hunter in his group. More disturbing still, the tracks seemed to appear and disappear at random intervals, as if their makers could step in and out of the physical world at will. "The forgotten ones," Mama Casey said, her voice heavy with foreboding. "They walk beside us now, drawn by the connection that was made at the ancient tree. They seek to use Chief Okello as a gateway, a means to return to the world of the living." As the afternoon shadows grew longer, the hunting party found themselves in a part of the forest that none of them recognized despite their intimate knowledge of the Tiru's vast expanse. The trees here were older and larger than any they had seen before, their trunks so massive that it would take 20 men holding hands to encircle them. The canopy above was so thick that only the faintest glimmers of sunlight penetrated to the forest floor, creating an environment of perpetual twilight. And in this strange, timeless place, they finally encountered their quarry, but not in any form they had expected. A magnificent bull elephant stood in a clearing ahead, its tusks gleaming like ivory spears in the dim light. But as the hunters prepared their nets and spears, they realized that something was terribly wrong. The great beast cast no shadow, and its eyes held an intelligence that was distinctly disturbingly human. "Do not hunt what cannot die," the elephant spoke, its voice resonating not through the air, but directly in their minds. "Iam Kwame, once chief of the Forgotten Ones, now guardian of the threshold between worlds, you have awakened forces that have slumbered for centuries. Okello of the Two Shadows, the question now is whether you will have the wisdom to control them, or whether they will control you." The hunting party stood frozen in shock and terror as the spectral elephant regarded them with ancient, sorrowful eyes. In the distance, the sound of drums grew louder, and Chief Okello realized that the great hunt had become something far more dangerous and significant than anyone could have imagined. The boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the spirits was dissolving, and he stood at the center of it all, the unwilling key to mysteries that perhaps should have remained forever locked away. "I want to know how far this message is reaching. Comment below and tell me which city or country you're watching from." The spectral elephant, Kwame, the former chief of the Forgotten Ones, stood motionless in the clearing, its massive form radiating an otherworldly presence that made the very air shimmer with supernatural energy. The hunting party remained frozen, their weapons useless, against a creature that existed beyond the realm of physical harm. Chief Okello stepped forward, his western shadow stretching long and dark across the forest floor, while his eastern shadow remained distant, still anchored to the sacred fire in their village. The duality of his existence had never felt more pronounced than in this moment, standing before a being that had transcended the normal boundaries of life and death. "You speak of wisdom and control," Okello said, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped his heart. "But I did not seek this burden. The shadows came to me unbidden, and I have no understanding of their purpose." The elephant's trunk swayed gently, and when it spoke again, its mental voice carried the weight of centuries of regret and longing. None of us sought the burden we carry, young chief. I too was once a leader of my people, proud and confident in my understanding of the world. But pride led us to seek powers beyond our comprehension, and now we exist in the spaces between worlds, neither fully alive nor truly dead. Mama Cassie stepped forward, her ancient frame trembling with the effort of maintaining her composure in the presence of such powerful spiritual forces. Great Kwame, she said, using the formal address reserved for the most revered ancestors, what do you require of us? What debt must be paid to restore the balance that was disturbed? The spectral elephant's eyes, deep pools of starlight, in the gathering gloom, fixed upon the wise woman with something approaching gratitude. You remember the old ways, keeper of stories. That gives me hope. The debt is not one of payment, but of choice. Your chief stands at a crossroads that will determine not only his fate, but the fate of both our peoples. As if summoned by Kwame's words, the forest around them began to change. The trees seemed to grow taller and more ancient, their bark taking on the appearance of weathered stone. The air itself became thick and luminous, filled with swirling motifs of light that danced like fireflies in the perpetual twilight. And from the shadows between the trees they came, the forgotten ones. They appeared as translucent figures, their forms shifting between human and animal, between solid and ethereal. Some bore the features of the Mbuti people, but with skin that glowed with an inner phosphorescence. Others had taken on aspects of the forest creatures, the grace of the leopard, the strength of the gorilla, the wisdom of the ancient tortoise. Amara Gaspetan instinctively moved closer to her father, her tracker's senses overwhelmed by the presence of beings that left no physical trace, yet radiated power like heat from a fire. "Father," she whispered, "what do they want from us?" One of the forgotten ones stepped forward, a woman whose beauty was both terribly and magnificent, her hair flowing like liquid starlight, her eyes holding depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies. When she spoke, her words was like the sound of wind through crystal caves. "We want what we have been denied for so long," she said, her gaze fixed upon Chief Okello. "We want to live again, to feel the earth beneath our feet and the sun upon our faces. We want to hunt and feast, and love and die as mortals do. And you, Chief of Two Shadows, are the key to our return." Congo, the eldest hunter, found his voice, despite his terror. "And what of our people? What becomes of the living if the dead return to walk among us?" The woman's expression grew sad, and for a moment her ethereal beauty was overshadowed by an infinite weariness. "That is the choice that must be made. We cannot return without displacing others. For every one of us who reclaims life, one of the living must take our place in the realm between worlds." The implications of her words struck the hunting party like a physical blow. The forgotten ones were not seeking resurrection, they were seeking replacement, a cosmic exchange that would condemn the living to the same liminal existence that had been their punishment for centuries. "No," Okello said firmly, his hand tightening on his spear. "I will not trade the lives of my people for yours, no matter what power you offer or what threats you make." Kwame's massive head nodded slowly, and there was approval in his ancient eyes. "Spoken like a true chief, but the choice is not so simple, Okello of Two Shadows. The magic that created your dual nature has already begun the process. Even now, the boundary between worlds grows thinner. Soon, whether you will it or not, the exchange will begin." As if to emphasize his words, the forest around them shuddered, and the hunters could see cracks appearing in the very fabric of reality, fissures through which otherworldly light poured like liquid fire. Through these gaps they could glimpse their village in the distance, where the eastern shadow still waited by the sacred fire. But something was wrong with the village. The people moved with unnatural slowness, their actions becoming increasingly mechanical and lifeless. It was as if their very essence was being slowly drained away, pulled toward the realm of the forgotten ones. "You see," the beautiful woman said, her voice now tinged with urgency, "the process has already begun. Your people grow weaker with each passing moment. their life force flowing into our realm. Soon there will be nothing more than empty shells, and we will have what we seek without your cooperation. But if you choose to help us willingly, the transition can be selected. You can choose who lives and who takes our place in the between realm. Amara stepped forward, her young face set with determination. And if we refuse to choose, if we find another way? The woman's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. There is no other way, child. The magic has been set in motion, and it cannot be stopped, only directed. But Mama Kessie, who had remained silent throughout this exchange, suddenly raised her voice in a chant that predated memory, words in a language so ancient that even the forgotten ones seemed surprised to hear it. The bony ornaments around her neck began to glow with the same phosphorescent light as the symbols on the ancient tree. There is always another way, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. The old magic speaks of sacrifice, yes, but not the sacrifice of the innocent for the guilty. The one who opened the door must be the one to close it. Kwame's massive form began to shimmer, and for a moment his elephant shape wavered, revealing the human form beneath, a tall, proud man whose face bore the weight of centuries of regret. You speak of the final choice, he said, his mental voice heavy with sorrow. But that path leads to obliteration, not redemption. The one who closes the door is destroyed utterly, body and soul, existing neither in the world of the living nor the realm of the dead. But the others would be saved, Okello said, understanding flooding through him like cold water. My people would live, and yours would find peace at last. The beautiful woman's form began to flicker with agitation. You cannot seriously consider such a course. You would sacrifice yourself for people who will forget your name within a generation, while we who have suffered for centuries would simply cease to exist. Perhaps, Okello replied, his voice growing stronger with conviction. That is what justice looks like. You sought powers beyond your right to wield it, and the consequences of that choice have rippled through the centuries. Now the time has come to end the cycle, not perpetuate it. The forest around them began to tremble more violently, and the cracks in reality widened, revealing glimpses of other worlds, other possibilities. In the distance, the sound of drums grew to a thunderous crescendo, and Chief Okello realized that the moment of ultimate choice was fast approaching. He looked at his daughter, at his faithful hunters, at the wise woman who had guided his people for so many years. Then he looked at the forgotten ones, seeing past their supernatural beauty to the desperate hunger that drove them, the endless ache of existence without true life or peaceful death. "You know what must be done," he said quietly, and in that moment, both of his shadows, the one that stood beside him and the one that waited by the sacred fire, began to move toward each other across the impossible distance that separated them. The final chapter of the Great Hunt was about to begin. The convergence of Chief Okello's two shadows created a phenomenon that defied the natural order of the world. Across the vast distance that separated the hunting party from their village, the eastern shadow began to move, leaving its post by the sacred fire and traveling through the forest with impossible speed. The villagers who witnessed its passage stood transfixed, watching as the dark silhouette glided over streams, through trees, and across clearings, as if the physical world posed no barrier to its journey. Meanwhile, in the clearing where the forgotten ones had gathered, reality itself seemed to bend and warp around Chief Okello. The air grew thick as honey, and time moved in stuttering, irregular pulses. The hunters found themselves caught in a supernatural tableau, able to observe but powerless to intervene, as cosmic forces beyond their comprehension played out before them. "The shadows seek reunification," Kwame observed, his spectral form growing more solid as the magical energies intensified. "When they merge, the door between worlds will be fully opened. What happens next will determine the fate of all who exist in both realms." The beautiful woman of the Forgotten Ones stepped closer to Okello, her ethereal form radiating desperate hope. You still have time to reconsider, Chief of Two Shadows. Choose willing participants from among your people, and we can make the transition gentle, even merciful. They need not suffer as we have suffered. But Okelo's attention was focused inward, on the strange sensations that accompanied his shadow's journey home. Through the eastern shadow, he could perceive his village with supernatural clarity, every hut, every person, every detail of the life he had known since birth. He could see his wife, Nagyota, tending to their youngest son, unaware that her husband's fate was being decided in a distant clearing. He could see the elders gathered around the sacred fire, their faces creased with worry as they watched the shadow's departure. Most disturbing of all, he could see the gradual changes that were overtaking his people. Their movements were becoming increasingly sluggish, their eyes growing dim and unfocused. The life force was indeed being drained from them, pulled into the realm of the Forgotten Ones by the magical connection that his dual nature had established. "How long do they have?" he asked, his voice tight with anguish. Mama Kessie consulted the bone ornaments around her neck, reading their arrangement like a cosmic calendar. "Until the moon reaches its zenith," she said grimly. "Perhaps 3 hours, no more. After that, the process will be irreversible, and your people will become empty vessels, while the Forgotten Ones claim their bodies." Amara moved to her father's side, her young face set with fierce determination. "Then we fight," she said simply. "We may not understand this magic, but we understand courage. We understand sacrifice. If these spirits want our people, they'll have to go through us first." The other hunters murmured their agreement, raising their spears and nets, despite the futility of such weapons against supernatural foes. Their loyalty was absolute, their willingness to die for their chief and their people unquestioned. But Kwame's massive head shook sadly. "Courage is admirably, young tracker, but it cannot overcome the fundamental laws that govern the relationship between the physical and spiritual worlds. The magic that your chief has awakened operates according to principles that existed before your people drew their first breath, and will continue long after your last descendant has returned to the earth." "Then explain these principles," Okelo demanded. "If I am to make an informed choice, I must understand exactly what forces I am dealing with." The spectral elephant's form shimmered, and suddenly the clearing was filled with images, visions of the past, present, and possible futures that swirled around them like living tapestries. The hunters watched in awe and terror as the story of the Forgotten Ones unfolded before their eyes. They saw a civilization that had achieved perfect harmony with the forest, a people whose understanding of spiritual forces had allowed them to live in peace and prosperity for countless generations. They saw the gradual corruption of that harmony as ambition and pride led the Forgotten Ones to seek powers that were meant only for the gods themselves. They witnessed the great ritual that had been intended to grant immortality, but had instead trapped its participants in a liminal existence between life and death. They felt the anguish of beings who could perceive the world of the living but could never again truly be part of it, who could remember the taste of food and the warmth of sunlight, but could never again experience such simple pleasures. And they saw the cosmic balance that governed all existence, the law that stated that energy could neither be created nor destroyed, only transformed. For the Forgotten Ones to reclaim life, that life force had to come from somewhere. The universe demanded equilibrium, and the price of resurrection was always replacement. "But there is another law," Mama Kessie said, her voice cutting through the visions like a blade of pure truth. "The law of willing sacrifice, of love that transcends the boundaries of self. When one offers their existence freely without coercion or deception, the cosmic balance can be satisfied without condemning the innocent." The beautiful woman of the Forgotten Ones turned on the wise woman with fury blazing in her starlight eyes. "You speak of fairy tales and children's stories. The universe is not moved by sentiment or noble gestures. It operates according to immutable laws that care nothing for mortal concepts of love and sacrifice." "Does it?" Okeljo asked quietly, And suddenly his eastern shadow burst into the clearing, moving with the speed of thought to rejoin its western counterpart. The moment the two shadows merged, the chief's form blazed with an inner light that revivaled the sun itself. In that instant of reunification, Okelio experienced a revelation that shattered his understanding of reality. He saw that the universe was indeed governed by laws, but those laws were not the cold, mechanical forces that the Forgotten Ones believed them to be. They were expressions of a deeper truth, that existence itself was an act of love, that consciousness was the universe's way of experiencing itself, and that the highest expression of that consciousness was the willingness to sacrifice oneself for others. "You understand thou," he said, his voice resonating with newfound power and purpose. "You sought to cheat death by avoiding the natural cycle of existence. But death is not the enemy. It is the completion of life's purpose, the final gift that allows new life to flourish. You have been trapped not by cosmic law, but by your own refusal to accept that truth." The Forgotten Ones began to waver, their forms becoming less solid as Okelio's words struck at the very foundations of their existence. For centuries, they had told themselves that they were victims of cosmic injustice, that their punishment was undeserved. But deep in their hearts, they had always known the truth, that their suffering was self-imposed, a prison built from their own fear and pride. "What are you saying?" the beautiful woman whispered, her voice now small and uncertain. "I'm saying that there is a way to end this that doesn't require the sacrifice of the innocent," Okello replied, his merged shadows beginning to pulse with rhythmic light. "But it requires you to choose acceptance over resistance, peace over power, love over fear." Kwame's massive form began to tremble, and for the first time in centuries, something like hope flickered in his ancient eyes. "You speak of the final release," he said wonderingly, "but it would mean letting go," Okello confirmed. "Releasing your hold on existence and allowing yourselves to pass into whatever comes next. It would mean trusting that the universe has a purpose for you beyond this liminal existence, even if you cannot see what that purpose might be." The forest around them fell silent as the Forgotten Ones contemplated this possibility. For beings who had clung to existence for so long, the prospect of voluntary release was both terrifying and liberating. They could continue their current path, condemning the innocent to share their fate, or they could choose the unknown, trusting in forces greater than themselves. As the moon reached its zenith and the moment of final decision arrived, Chief Okello prepared to make the greatest sacrifice of all. Not his life, but his certainty, his control, his very understanding of what it meant to exist. For in order to save both peoples, it would have to become something entirely new, a bridge between worlds that could guide the Forgotten Ones to their final rest, while preserving the lives of his own people. The great hunt was about to reach its true conclusion, and the prey they had been seeking all along was not an animal at all, but the courage to face the ultimate mystery of existence itself. As the moon reached its zenith, bathing the forest clearing in ethereal silver light, Chief Okello felt the full weight of his transformation settling upon him like a mantle woven from starlight and shadow. His merged shadows no longer simply followed his movements, they had become extensions of his will, tendrils of consciousness that could reach into both the physical world and the realm of spirits. The Forgotten Ones stood in a circle around him, their translucent forms flickering between hope and despair, as they contemplated the choice he had offered them. For centuries, they had existed in the spaces between worlds, sustained by their refusal to accept the finality of death. Now faced with the possibility of true release, they struggled with fears that had become as much a part of them as their ethereal flesh. How can we trust in something we cannot see or understand? The beautiful woman asked, her voice carrying the weight of endless years of suffering. We have existed in uncertainty for so long that the known agony has become preferably to the unknown possibility of peace. Okello stepped forward, his form radiating the strange dual nature that had marked him since the appearance of his second shadow. Because, he said gently, Uncertainty is the price of growth, and growth is the purpose of existence. You have been trapped not by cosmic law but by your own refusal to embrace the mystery of what comes after life. Through his expanded consciousness, he could perceive the village in the distance, where his people continued their slow decline into emptiness. Time was running short, but he knew that forcing the forgotten ones to choose would only perpetuate the cycle of suffering that had trapped them for so long. Mama Cassie stepped forward, her ancient frame somehow strengthened by the supernatural energies that filled the clearing. "Great spirits," she said, addressing the forgotten ones with the respect due to beings who had transcended normal existence. "I have lived long enough to see many endings, and I have learned that every ending is also a beginning. The caterpillar must die for the butterfly to be born. The seed must surrender its form for the tree to grow. What you fear as destruction may be the transformation you have been seeking all along." Kwame's massive form shuddered, and his mental voice carried a note of wonder that had been absent for centuries. "You speak of metamorphosis," he said, "but we have been neither caterpillar nor butterfly for so long that we have forgotten what it means to change." "Then let me show you," Okello said, and suddenly his consciousness expanded beyond the confines of his physical form, reaching out to encompass not only the forgotten ones, but the entire forest itself. Through his enhanced perception, he could see the intricate web of connections that bound all living things together, the mycorrhizal networks that allowed trees to communicate across vast distances, the chemical signals that passed between plants and animals, the invisible currents of energy that flowed through every leaf and stone and drop of water. He could perceive the forest not as a collection of separate entities, but as a single vast organism, of which every creature was merely a cell. And in that moment of expanded awareness, he understood the true nature of the choice that faced them all. The forgotten ones had become disconnected from this web of life, trapped in their own isolated existence, like cells that had forgotten they were part of a larger body. Their suffering came not from cosmic punishment, but from the fundamental loneliness of separation. "Look," he said, sharing his vision with the assembled spirits. "See how everything is connected, how every ending feeds new beginnings, how death and life are not opposites, but partners in an eternal dance. You have been trying to exist outside this dance, to claim the benefits of life without accepting its responsibilities, its limitations, its sacred cycles." The forgotten ones, gasped as Okello's vision filled their consciousness, showing them the beauty and purpose they had been blind to for so long. They saw how their own disconnection had created a wound in the fabric of existence, a tear that had allowed the unnatural magic of their liminal state to persist. "But if we rejoin the dance," the beautiful woman whispered, "if we accept the transformation you offer, what guarantee do we have that we will not simply cease to exist entirely?" "None," Okello admitted with profound honesty. "There are no guarantees in the dance of existence, only faith in the wisdom of the pattern itself. But I can tell you this, the alternative is to remain forever frozen in this moment of transition, never growing, never changing, never discovering what you might become." As he spoke, Amara noticed that the cracks in reality that had appeared earlier were beginning to heal themselves. The supernatural energies that had been building toward a catastrophic exchange were slowly dissipating, replaced by something far more subtle but infinitely more powerful, the gentle force of willing transformation. "Father," she said softly, "your shadows, they're changing." Okello looked down to see that his merged shadows were no longer dark silhouettes, but had become translucent, shot through with veins of silver light that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. As he watched, the shadows began to extend outward, creating a bridge of light that connected the physical world to the realm of the spirits. "The bridge is forming," Kwame observed with awe. "But Chief Okello, you must understand, to maintain such a connection will require all of your life force. You will not survive the completion of this ritual." "I know," Okello replied calmly, "but my people will live, and you will find the peace you have been seeking for so long. That is a fair exchange." "No," Amara cried out, moving toward her father. "There must be another way. You cannot sacrifice yourself for—" But her words were cut short as Mama Casey placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Child," the wise woman said, "your father is not dying. He is becoming something new, something that has never existed before. He is becoming the eternal guardian of the threshold between worlds, ensuring that the balance is maintained and that such suffering never occurs again." The truth of the wise woman's words became apparent as Okello's transformation accelerated. His physical form was becoming translucent, but rather than fading away, he was gaining a new kind of substance, a presence that existed simultaneously in both the world of the living and the realm of the spirits. One by one, the forgotten ones began to step onto the bridge of light that extended from Okello's transformed shadows. As they did so, their forms began to change, shedding the desperate hunger that had defined their existence for so long, and taking on a serene luminescence that spoke of acceptance and peace. "We remember now," the beautiful woman said as she stepped onto the bridge, her voice filled with wonder. "We remember what it feels like to trust in something greater than ourselves, to be part of the eternal pattern rather than fighting against it." Kwame was the last to approach the bridge, his massive form having returned fully to its human shape. A tall, dignified man whose face bore the wisdom of ages, but no longer carried the weight of endless regret. "Thank you, Chief Okello," he said simply. "You have given us the greatest gift possible, the courage to let go." As the former chief of the Forgotten Ones stepped onto the bridge of light, the entire forest seemed to exhale in relief. The supernatural tension that had gripped the Ituri for so long finally released, and the natural rhythms of life resumed their ancient patterns. But the transformation was not yet complete. As the last of the Forgotten Ones crossed the bridge and disappeared into whatever realm awaited them beyond the threshold of existence, Chief Okello felt his own consciousness expanding to fill the space they had vacated. He was becoming something unprecedented, a guardian spirit who could exist in both worlds simultaneously, ensuring that the balance between life and death, physical and spiritual, would never again be so catastrophically disrupted. The great hunt was ending, but in a way that none of them could have imagined when it began. Dawn broke over the Ituri forest with a clarity and beauty that seemed to herald a new age. The supernatural tensions that had gripped the woodland for centuries had finally dissipated, leaving behind an atmosphere of profound peace and renewal. In the village, the Mbuti people awakened from their mysterious lethargy to find their strength and vitality fully restored. Though they retained hazy memories of strange dreams filled with silver light and ancient voices speaking of forgiveness and release. In the clearing where the final transformation had taken place, the hunting party stood in awed silence before the figure that had once been their chief. Okello's physical form had become something entirely new, neither fully human nor completely spirit, but a perfect synthesis of both states of being. His body appeared solid and real, yet it seemed to be composed of condensed starlight, and his eyes held depths that reflected both the wisdom of the ancestors and the vitality of the living world. "Father," Amara whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of grief and wonder. Are you still you?" The being that had been Chief Okello smiled, and in that expression she saw all the love and warmth that had defined her father, enhanced now by a cosmic understanding that transcended mortal limitation. "I am still your father, my daughter," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of reality. "But I am also something more, a guardian of the threshold, a keeper of the balance between worlds." Mama Casey approached the transformed chief with reverence, her ancient eyes bright with tears of joy and sorrow. "The prophecy spoke of such a being," she said softly, "one who would arise in the time of greatest need to heal the wounds between the world of the living and the realm of the spirits. But I never dared to hope that I would live to see such a miracle." "It is not a miracle," Okello replied gently. "It is simply the natural result of choosing love over fear, connection over separation, service over self. The forgotten ones suffered for so long because they tried to exist outside the great pattern of existence. I have chosen to become part of that pattern in a new way. As I spoke, the transformed chief gestured toward the forest around them, and the hunters could see that subtle changes were already taking place. The trees seemed more vibrant, their leaves rustling with a music that spoke of perfect harmony between the physical and spiritual realms. Animals that had fled during the supernatural disturbances were returning, their eyes bright with an intelligence that suggested a deeper connection to the cosmic order. "What does this mean for our people?" asked Congo, the eldest hunter, his weathered face creased with concern. "Will you still be our chief? Will you still guide us in the hunt and in the decisions that affect our tribe?" "I will always be here for you," Okelio assured him. "But my role has changed. I am no longer just the chief of the Mbuti people. I am the guardian of all who dwell in this forest, both living and spirit. I will ensure that the balance is maintained, that the mistakes of the past are not repeated, and that the boundary between worlds remains stable and secure." Young Bomani, who had been silent throughout the transformation, finally found his voice. "But what about the great hunt? What about the traditions that have guided our people for countless generations?" The guardian's smile grew broader, and suddenly the air around them filled with the sound of drums, not the supernatural rhythms that had accompanied the crisis, but the familiar comforting beats that had always marked a successful conclusion of a hunt. "The great hunt continues," Okelio said, "but it has evolved just as all things must evolve. You will still venture into the forest to seek the animals that sustain your people, but now you will do so with the knowledge that you are part of a greater web of existence. You will hunt not as conquerors but as participants in the eternal dance of life and death, taking only what you need and giving thanks for all that you receive." As if to demonstrate his words, a magnificent antelope stepped into the clearing, not a spirit or phantom, but a living creature whose presence seemed to radiate the same harmonious energy that now permeated the forest. The animal regarded the hunters with calm, intelligent eyes, and they understood that this was their quarry for the day, offered freely by the forest itself as a gift to sustain their people. "The hunt is successful," Amara breathed, her tracker's instincts recognizing the profound rightness of this moment. "But it feels different now. It feels sacred." "All life is sacred," the guardian replied. "That is the lesson the forgotten ones finally learned, and it is the truth that will guide our people into the future. We are not separate from the forest. We are part of it, and it is part of us. Our role is not to dominate but to participate, not to take but to exchange, not to fear death, but to honor it as the completion of life's purpose." As the day progressed and the hunting party prepared to return to their village with their gift from the forest, they began to understand the magnitude of what had occurred. The great hunt had indeed been successful, but its true prey had not been an animal at all. It had been the restoration of balance to a world that had been wounded by the hubris of those who sought to transcend their natural place in the cosmic order. The guardian who had once been Chief Okello would remain in the forest, visible to those who needed his guidance, but existing primarily in the spaces between worlds. It would ensure that future generations understood the sacred nature of their relationship with the land and its creatures, and he would stand watch against any who might seek to repeat the mistakes of the forgotten ones. As the hunting party made their way back through the forest, they noticed that their path was lit by a gentle silver radiance that seemed to emanate from the very trees themselves. Behind them, the guardian's form gradually faded from physical sight, but his presence remained a comforting assurance that they were never truly alone, that the wisdom of the ancestors and the love of the living were forever intertwined in the eternal dance of existence. In the village, the people welcomed the returning hunters with joy and celebration, marveling at the story they told and the profound changes they could sense in the very air around them. The sacred fire at the heart of the community burned brighter than ever before, its flames dancing with colors that had never been seen in the mortal world. And in the depths of the Mbuti forest, where the ancient trees whispered secrets to the wind and the spirits of the ancestors walked in harmony with the living, the guardian kept his eternal watch. It was no longer Chief Okelio of the Mbuti people, but he was something far greater, a bridge between worlds, a keeper of balance, a living testament to the power of love and sacrifice to transform even the deepest wounds into sources of healing and renewal. The great hunt of 1976 had ended, but its legacy would endure for all time. A reminder that the greatest victories are not won through force or cunning, but through the courage to choose connection over separation, love over fear, and service over self. In the heart of the Congo Basin, where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds had been forever transformed, the eternal dance of existence continued, guided by the wisdom of one who had learned to cast not two shadows, but infinite light. The story of the chief who cast two shadows became legend among the Mbuti people, passed down through generations as a reminder of the sacred responsibility that comes with leadership and the transformative power of willing sacrifice. And in the deepest parts of the forest, where the ancient magic still flows like an underground river, travelers sometimes report glimpsing a figure of silver light moving between the trees, a guardian who watches over all who dwell in the green cathedral of the Utiri, ensuring that the balance between worlds remains forever secure. The great hunt continues still, but it is no longer a hunt for prey. It is a hunt for understanding, for connection, for the sacred harmony that binds all living things together in the eternal web of existence. And at its heart stands the guardian, the bridge between worlds, the chief who learned that the greatest shadow a leader can cast is not one of dominance or fear, but one of love that encompasses all of creation.